May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It is so good to see you all. What an amazing day. The music is so fabulous. I feel so energized being up here. I'm going to try not to mess it up, all right? Keep this vibe going. So this morning's gospel story that we just heard has always felt a little bit uncomfortable. A mother comes to Jesus desperate for her daughter's healing, and Jesus, recognizing that this woman is not a fellow Jew, and he responds in a way that seems so out of character for him. His response can easily be categorized as exclusive, heartless, and insulting. Jesus says to this mother, "Let the children be fed first. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Meaning that his priority is to the Jewish people and not Gentiles. And this desperate mother's heartbreaking response is this. She says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table catch the crumbs that fall from the children." And Jesus apparently is so impressed with her response that he heals her daughter. And you want to rejoice and celebrate with this mother for the miracle, except how we got there is so questionable. The power difference, the humiliation, the fact that she feels forced to admit to being a dog in front of this Jewish rabbi just because she desperately needs what he has to offer, the healing of her daughter. Yuck. Yuck. It's not necessarily the story that you want to lead with if you're trying to introduce someone to Jesus. Except, here's the thing. That is exactly what the gospel author Mark is trying to do. He is promoting Jesus to non-Jews with this story. Which means only one thing, that we've got this whole story wrong. And so what I want to do today is show us two things. I want to show us why this is one of the most important stories in the Gospel of Mark. And then I want to show us that what this story has to teach us connects so perfectly with what St. John's is all about as we kick off a new program year on this beautiful Renewal Sunday. So over 20 years ago, I was in San Francisco visiting my aunt. My grandma was also living there at the time, and I went to pick her up from church. There was this church that she had decided to visit that morning. I don't know why I didn't go with her. It's not important. So she gets in the car, and she tells me a story of something that happened to her that morning that I could not believe. This thing was so hilarious. So here's the story. She's sitting in church, this elderly Palestinian woman from a small village in Palestine. And there's, as a part of the service, up front, there's this person in a wheelchair telling her story about how she got in the wheelchair, and it's really deep, it's really moving, it's heartbreaking. And my grandmother felt compelled to get out of her pew in the middle of the service, in the middle of this thing, and walk up and stand by this poor lady in the wheelchair, hold her hand, and in front of everybody, let her know that she was not alone. And so my grandma goes into this whole thing. I'm a Palestinian. Our people have struggled, and I want you to know that this struggle that you have in your life, you're not alone. There are people in the world who struggle with you. And she held her hand while the lady finished her thing. And she felt so good about herself, my grandma did. Until she got to the coffee hour and noticed that the person that was in the wheelchair was walking around during coffee hour. And she asked somebody, like, what, is that the same person? Yeah, and she was so confused, only to find out that the few minutes at the beginning of the service where she missed the service, she kind of came in late, my grandma missed the small fact that that was actually a skit. She said that she wished the ground would just open up and swallow her up. Why do I share this story with you? Context is everything. It is really easy to misunderstand a situation if you don't know what the context is. So let's take a look at the context of the Gospel of Mark. It has so much to show us, starting with what we know about the Gospel itself. So Mark's intention, as is the intention of every one of the 4 Gospel authors, is ultimately to make disciples. And each of the Gospel writers has their own target audience for their letter. So Mark, his primary target audience, as I alluded to last Sunday, is non-Jews. He wants to tell the story of Jesus, and he wants to do it in a way that is most compelling for his non-Jewish target audience. So what we know about this morning's story, which features an interaction between Jesus and a non-Jew, this Gentile woman, is that it is meant to sell Jesus to non-Jews. Are you with me? And there is no way that this story would be appealing to a non-Jew if Jesus was portrayed as racist against non-Jews. That's the first thing that we know. Another thing that we know that's super important is that prior to this story in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has already healed another non-Jew voluntarily, someone who didn't ask to be healed, in one of the biggest miracles of Jesus to date, the healing of the Gerasene demoniac, which tells us that Jesus himself did not believe that his ministry was exclusively to Jews. But probably the most important and usually most ignored piece of context is the location of this story. We're told that Jesus traveled from Galilee, predominantly Jewish area, where Jews stayed. He traveled up to Tyre, the heart of Gentile territory. Tyre is in modern-day Lebanon, the third largest city in Lebanon today. It's about a 3 days journey. So Jesus didn't just accidentally get to Tyre. Jesus traveled to Tyre, where this story takes place. So this Syrophoenician woman didn't travel into Jewish territory to seek Jesus out. Mark wants you to know that Jesus went to her hometown. Not only that, but the strangest information about Jesus' itinerary is about to happen. Because also in our gospel reading this morning, we're told that on the way back from Tyre, which is up here, 3 days down to Galilee, on the way back to Galilee, Jesus goes by way of Sidon. Now, if you know where Sidon is, it's another 2 days up north in Lebanon, further into the heart of the Phoenician realm. Which means that Jesus visited Tyre and Sidon, which colloquially was a reference to the Gentile world. So if you were to talk about Tyre and Sidon, what that meant was the Gentile world as opposed to the Jewish world. So the statement, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs," is not only something Jesus himself did not believe, but he was actively demonstrating the opposite. Jesus was, even before the woman ever stepped foot into the door. So this leaves only one explanation for why Jesus said what he said to this Gentile mother. Mark is not interested in sweeping under the rug the uncomfortable racial dynamics at play with Jesus being a Jew and Mark's audience being Gentile. So he's not saying, look, guys, I got a great Savior for you. He's Jewish, but don't worry about that, right? He's awesome. Instead, what Mark wants to do is he wants to name the elephant in the room, because every Gentile in his audience is going to be thinking the same exact thing. Jews see Gentiles as unworthy dogs. So what makes this Jewish rabbi different than the rest of them? So Mark's strategy is to have Jesus start out with the most obvious, the non-surprising, anticipated prejudice that any Gentile would expect a Jew to have. Now, I'm not sure this would be my personal strategy, but there you go. So Jesus starts out with the elephant in the room, the expected prejudice. Then Mark has this Gentile woman best Jesus in the argument, something no one in the Gospels has done so far. Not any of the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, the Pharisees or the scribes, nobody has been able to do this. But this Gentile woman bests Jesus in the argument. But Jesus doesn't, it's not even an argument anyway, right? Because Jesus doesn't even believe this stuff, as Mark is so clearly demonstrated if you are his audience and you know where Jesus is sitting and who Jesus has already healed. So the healing of the daughter becomes no longer an act of pity or mercy that a Jewish rabbi reluctantly extends to this pitiful Gentile as a favor. But rather, this woman and Jesus together, they crack open the ethnic and religious-based prejudice of their day, exposing a God who honors faith wherever faith can be found. And this Gentile woman, she stakes a claim to God's blessing. This, Mark says to his Gentile audience, is how you go from Jesus, who is a Jew, to Jesus, who is for you. He's not like the rest. So what does this story have to do with you and me? And what does it have to do with St. John's? The first thing I want to say is, I wish somebody could rewrite the story, only because every time we read it, everybody cringes, and then the priest has to try to save it. I hope that you've seen today that it's not even a stretch to try to save this story. The context tells you everything you need to know. What you think is going on is not what's going on. This is actually so empowering and is so what Mark is trying to convey, which I'm going to get to in a second. But let me just pause here and say that, like many of you, I've spent many seasons in my life looking for a church to belong to. So I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and then once I was on my own, I was always looking for that church that was going to meet me where I am. And my search was always for one thing, specifically, even though what it looked like was a little bit different. It's the same thing you searched for and have searched for in the churches that you visited. And if you're visiting here today, it's the thing you're probably searching for today. And that is relevance. I was searching for a church that was going to be relevant to me. And if you care about this kind of stuff, a church that is relevant to the world around it. If there's anything that Mark is trying to convey to his audience in this morning's gospel, it's this: Jesus is relevant to you. And Mark labored to make sure that this point was coming across. He openly challenges the existing perceptions about God and religion that could have gotten in the way. He names it, like naming the elephant in the room. He preaches a Jesus who cares not only about those on the inside, not only those who came looking for church, if you will, but Jesus takes church out to them in the territories way beyond the walls of the church. So Mark preaches a Jesus who is relevant. And this, my friends, is what I love so much about St. John's. I know it's easy for the rector of the church to say, we're being relevant. But my guess is if you are here, then you feel it too. You don't have to be here for very long to notice that the heartbeat of this place, what makes our heart beat, is making Jesus relevant both within the church and beyond the walls of the church. We don't just wait for people to come in. We are actively going out into the world to bring Jesus to the world. We are purposeful in counteracting this impression and this, this stereotype of Christians in the community. This stereotype that Christians are exclusive, that Christians are judgmental, that Christians are gatekeepers to God. We try really hard at St. John's to counteract that perception. We do this because we want people to know that it's not about us and that it's about something so much bigger than us. And we do it with conviction because we believe that the most important thing is for the world to know that God is love and that God is relevant. This is why we do what we do, and the way that we do it is by serving. We serve. I'm so excited for you today to have a chance after the service to go into our parish hall. This is one of the biggest days at St. John's, other than the actual feast like Easter and Christmas, Renewal Sunday, and we go all out. So in the parish hall, we've got a massive barbecue, a feast, because we don't know how to celebrate without food at St. John's. We've got all kinds of fun stuff for the kids on the blacktop. And then in the parish hall, also lining the walls, are tables, and every single ministry at St. John's is being featured. It's not a look at us, look how cool we are. This is the kind of church we are, and here are ways for you to consider getting involved. Now, I'm not saying we're looking for bodies. That's the last thing St. John's needs. We just need bodies to sign up for things. No. I'm asking you today to walk through there with one question in your heart and your mind. Where is God calling me to serve right now? You're going to see all kinds of things. There are parts of our worship, like reading in church, giving communion, being parts of the welcome team or our healing prayer ministry or part of the music ministry. There are things that have to do with our education and growing, ways of serving our youth and our children and being involved in teaching. There are things around building community, like hospitality. If you are so excited about baking or making food because you love hosting people, or you care about pastoral care, and you've wondered, do I have to be a priest in order to go and meet with people and be there for them pastorally? No, you don't. We've got a ministry for that. And then we've got all of the make a difference, what we call the parts of what we do that are beyond the church, ways of getting involved with almost every type of social justice and humanitarian activity that you could imagine. It's all there. We're not looking for bodies. That's not what the church is about. The church is about service. And the question, God, where are you calling me to serve as you go through, is such an awesome question, because it means that something might pop out to you and you're like, I'm ready for that. You might go home and go, I need to think about this because there's a lot of things and I want to make sure that I'm focusing. And then there might be nothing there that resonates with you. And I love that, because that is oftentimes God's way of saying that where you're called to serve doesn't exist yet at St. John's. It is so amazing to be in a place of discernment around service. And if you believe that God led you to St. John's, to this parish family, then you've got to believe that there is something particular about you that is needed in this place. That this church would not function on full, pump on all cylinders if you weren't living into whatever it is that you bring with you into this place. So I'm inviting you today not only to experience God's relevance for you, but inviting you to join us in making God relevant. And every act of service, every ministry, flashy or not flashy, high profile or low profile, forefront or behind the scenes, every ministry is an integral and indispensable part of what makes St. John's vibrant and relevant. So if I haven't said this to you lately, let me say it to you now. Whether you've been a part of this church for 50 years or whether you're here for the first time today, I'm so glad that you're here. In case you haven't noticed already, we are not a perfect church, and we don't pretend to be. Sometimes we pretend to be. but we know we're not. But we believe that God is love, and we believe that if we're going to get it wrong, we're going to err on the side of love. That's what makes us who we are at St. John's, and that's what you're a part of. The same messy, all are welcome type of community that Jesus modeled and called us to be, and we're here to serve. If that sounds good to you, then let's get on with it.